And finally, let's summarize what we covered with this very last section. So remember, Mendel, using his pea plants, was able to determine that the traits that are inherited, or the alleles, do not influence each other. So if your siblings have a certain trait, you are just as likely to have that trait or to not have that trait. It is completely random. Not one trait will influence another trait, and if it's going to be inherited or not. So we have developed that as the law of segregation. For our second question, we're trying to look at the difference between, we keep throwing around these words gene versus allele. So let's break that down a little more clearly. So whenever we're talking about a gene, that is coding for a specific trait. And so that trait is composed up of two alleles. One allele is given by each parent that gives us that variation of the gene, of that physical trait. And we can see this variation in two forms. One being the phenotype, or the physical appearance, or two, the genotype, and looking at the genes that code for that trait. Or more specifically, the two types of alleles that that individual has to have the physical appearance or phenotype that it does. So, for example, we could say that we have a purple pea plant, but the genotype can be two different combinations. It can either be capital P, lowercase p, or it can be two capital P's. The alleles in that case can be two different combinations, whereas the physical appearance, the phenotype, is only one, the color purple. For number 4, they're trying to throw you for a loop. So let's read this one carefully. If a recessive allele helps an organism reproduce, but the dominant allele hinders that reproduction ability, which allele would become more common in our population and why? So remember, in order for you to pass down traits to the next generation, you have to reproduce. If your trait is a dominant trait that is not allowing you to reproduce, therefore that trait is going to die with you. You're not going to be able to pass it down to the next generation. So if that's our case, this population is actually going to see more recessive alleles present because that allele is actually being able to be passed down. It is not hindering the reproductive process. Therefore, the offspring of those individuals will also carry or have the recessive trait. And finally, number 5, we have a good summary. We can combine information such as the law of segregation with our coin flips. How remember when we flipped our coin one time, it's not going to influence the outcome for the next coin flip. They are isolated from each other and more or less random. So we can talk about that for number 5.